There is a kind of silence that arrives after years of emotional noise. Not the silence of being alone in a room, but the quiet that comes when you stop checking your phone without realizing it. Messages remain unread. Group chats lose their urgency. Birthdays pass, and nothing inside you reaches out anymore. This silence was not planned. You did not decide one day to cut everyone out of your life. It formed slowly, through moments that felt small at the time. Another conversation that required more energy than you had. Another explanation that changed nothing. Another realization that being present did not mean being understood. Time 0.5s. What looks like withdrawal from the outside often begins as exhaustion on the inside. And beneath that exhaustion is a pattern most people never name. One shaped by imbalance, unmet emotional needs, and a nervous system that learned when connection no longer felt safe. There is a reason this kind of distance brings relief instead of emptiness. And it has less to do with not caring, and more to do with what caring has cost over time. Long before you stepped away, loneliness had already settled quietly in your life. You could be surrounded by people and still feel emotionally absent, unseen, or interchangeable. Conversations happened, plans were made, messages were exchanged, yet something essential never reached you. Being connected did not guarantee being supported. Over time, your body learned this difference even when your mind tried to ignore it. You learned how to stay present without being met, how to listen without being heard, how to show up without being remembered in moments that mattered. The loneliness you felt after leaving did not begin with distance. It simply became more honest once the noise faded. Distance did not create the emptiness. It revealed what had been there all along. At first, withdrawal looked like being busy. It sounded reasonable, harmless, polite. You told yourself you were just tired, overwhelmed, needing space. But slowly, busy stopped being an excuse and started becoming a boundary. You noticed how often explanations were ignored or misunderstood, how frequently you had to repeat yourself to people who never truly listened. Silence became easier than defending your need for rest. What others interpreted as avoidance felt different inside you. It felt like self-respect forming for the first time. Not dramatic, not angry, just quiet. You stopped apologizing for protecting your energy because you realized how often your apologies were used to keep things the same. For a long time, you were the reliable one, the person others leaned on during emotional difficulty. You remembered details, checked in, made space even when it cost you. Giving came naturally, without keeping score. Over time, this role became automatic. You rarely paused to ask whether the effort was mutual. You assumed connection required endurance. Then came the moment when you needed what you had always offered. Not attention, not admiration, just presence. Time 0.5s, and no one came. Messages went unanswered. Promises softened and disappeared. Support revealed itself as conditional, temporary, or unavailable when you were no longer strong enough to carry everyone else. That moment did not feel shocking. It felt clarifying. It showed you how alone you had always been beneath constant contact. And once you saw that, relationships began to change shape. You started noticing the cost. How much energy each connection required compared to what returned. Giving stopped feeling generous. It felt unsustainable. Leaving did not begin as rejectio, time 0.5s. It began as calculation, as your nervous system quietly asking how much more it could afford to lose. When you became less available, people noticed the absence, not the reason behind it. Responses slowed. Invitations stopped coming. Your presence quietly faded from routines that once relied on it. What drew attention was the change in your behavior, not the cost that behavior had carried for years. From the outside, the shift was easy to label. Distant, cold, different. People missed the version of you that always said yes, the one who absorbed discomfort without asking for anything back. What they did not ask was what it took to remain that person. Your withdrawal felt unsettling, because it interrupted what others received from you, not because it revealed anything about how you were doing. Long before you consciously understood this pattern, your nervous system had already learned it. Each connection followed a familiar rhythm. Presence when things were light, distance when things became heavy. Trust learned to associate closeness with eventual withdrawal. Your body began to anticipate the ending before it arrived. Connection stopped feeling soothing. It started to feel risky. Trust became expensive. Not because you were pessimistic, but because experience had been consistent. This learning lived beneath language, stored in sensation rather than thought. Your system adapted to reduce harm, not to avoid intimacy altogether. After enough repetitions, leaving first felt less painful than being left. Choosing the timing offered a sense of control when outcomes had always felt unpredictable. It did not feel dramatic or vengeful. It felt protective. Others might call it self-sabotage. Inside, it felt like self-preservation. You were not trying to punish anyone. You were trying to prevent a wound you already knew too well. Control became the only variable that felt reliable in relationships where disappointment had been the constant. The distance you created was rarely loud. There were no confrontations or final explanations. No long messages summarizing years of imbalance. It happened quietly. Replies stretched longer. Invitations were declined gently until they stopped arriving. Your absence became normal before anyone realized you were gone. This quiet leaving felt safer than reopening conversations that never led to change. After you left, anger did not stay the way people expect it to. Anger requires energy, and that energy had already been spent long before you walked away. What replaced it was something quieter and unfamiliar. Indifference. Not cruelty, not bitterness. Just the absence of emotional charge. You stopped replaying conversations in your mind. Stopped imagining explanations you would never give. Whether others understood your absence or misread it, no longer felt important. Their interpretations lost weight because you were no longer seeking validation from them. Indifference was not a sign that you never cared. It was the sign that exhaustion had finally reached its end. This pattern did not begin in adulthood. It did not appear suddenly after a few disappointing relationships. Somewhere much earlier, your nervous system learned that people were unreliable during moments of vulnerability. Care may have been inconsistent. Support may have been conditional or emotionally unavailable when you needed it most. Asking for help often led to disappointment or dismissal. Before you had language for it, your body learned self-reliance as protection. Depending on others began to feel unsafe long before you understood why. Independence formed slowly, not as pride, but as survival. You learned to handle things alone because waiting for help often led to nothing. Expecting less became a way to hurt less. What looked like strength from the outside was a response to repeated emotional loss. You were not choosing isolation because it felt good. You were choosing it because it felt safer than hoping someone would show up consistently. As you grew older, new relationships followed the same emotional arc, even with different people. Early connection felt promising. Attention was present. Effort seemed mutual. Then, gradually, imbalance returned. You found yourself giving more, adjusting more, waiting more. Support faded when vulnerability appeared, reinforcing what your system already recognized. Over time, you became sensitive to early signs of emotional withdrawal. Small changes in tone, response time, or effort no longer felt random. They felt familiar. Promises of future plans sounded less like intention and more like placeholders. Once the pattern was clear, you stopped chasing clarity. Pulling back quietly felt safer than waiting for disappointment to arrive again. Leaving stopped feeling like rejection. It started feeling like emotional survival. Staying began to require something from you that felt unsustainable. Shrinking yourself. Performing steadiness while absorbing imbalance. Accepting one-sided connection as normal. Each interaction asked you to give a little more than you had left. Over time, your nervous system stopped cooperating. It needed rest, not resilience. What others called walls felt different from the inside. They felt like boundaries forming too late, but still necessary. Cutting people off is often misunderstood as coldness or an inability to maintain relationships. In reality, it is more often a response to long-term emotional imbalance and repeated unmet needs. You did not leave because you stopped caring. You left because caring without reciprocity slowly eroded your sense of self. Isolation was not chosen because it felt rewarding. It was chosen because it felt safer than constant emotional disappointment. Being alone became less painful than being unseen in relationships filled with people. This choice is not about punishment, superiority, or withdrawal from connection itself. It is about refusing to accept fragments and call them closeness. It is about recognizing that peace sometimes requires distance, not because you are broken, but because you learned, through experience, what your nervous system can no longer carry. You are not cold. You are not incapable of intimacy. You are someone who learned that survival sometimes looks like walking away quietly before another familiar loss arrives. At this point, there is nothing left to explain or defend. No final argument that needs to be made. No list of reasons that must finally be understood. The pattern has already spoken through years of experience, long before words were ever formed for it. What you did was not sudden. It was not impulsive. It was the slow conclusion of a nervous system that learned, again and again, where connection stopped being mutual and started becoming costly. Distance did not come from a lack of feeling. It came from too much feeling held for too long without support. Cutting people off was not a rejection of love. It was a refusal to continue dissolving yourself inside relationships that could not hold you. It was choosing quiet over constant repair, safety over hope, rest over endurance. You are not broken for needing this distance. You are not failing at connection. You adapted in the only way that remained available to you at the time. And sometimes, adaptation looks like leaving, not to disappear, but to finally stop hurting in familiar ways.